Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome into the Cam Rogers Show on this Monday morning, October 30th, 2017. Wow, what a weekend in the sporting world, ladies and gentlemen. Big storylines coming out of college football as well as the NFL. I'm your host, Cam Rogers. We're taking you through the next hour, 11 o'clock Eastern time, as we always do on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Hey, Halloween's coming up tomorrow. You got the candy ready? Should be a fun one across the world for Halloween. It always brings excitement for the kids, but also for the adults and for the young adults, I guess you could say, like me. Always a good time to get into that holiday spirit, so I hope you all enjoy your Halloween out there tomorrow. By the way, maybe some players in the NFL might be moving on Halloween tomorrow. The trade deadline, 4 o'clock Eastern time, so a lot of teams have been rumored to make some big-time moves, so we shall see. Jimmy Graham, perhaps, moving on to another team, perhaps Houston. Houston sending Dwayne Brown, their left tackle, to Seattle. That was one big rumor that came out yesterday, first reported by Ian Rappaport of NFL Network. So a lot to get to until then, but right now we have a fun show where we will be talking about Jim McElwain, former head coach of the Florida Gators. He has mutually parted ways with Florida. Boy, spin zone central there. He was fired, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to cut right to the chase for all of you folks out there. He was fired. Safe to say it was a 3-week timeline that led to this moment. I'll get through the whole timeline. This is a developing story. Just reported last night by Brett McMurphy of ESPN, formerly of ESPN, that is. He's a college football insider nonetheless, saying that Florida and McElwain have agreed to a buyout in principle. So that was the original Brett McMurphy tweet from last night, saying that Jim McElwain may only get $4 million of the $12.9 million buyout because of the way in which he went through this weird, bizarre death threat type situation, which I'll get to later in the timeline. Brett then sent a follow-up tweet last night saying that McElwain and Florida have reached a deal in principle. So this is quite the situation here. So Jim McElwain is gone, essentially, but it's not over completely because they still have to deal with the money and all of that stuff right there. So there's the player card on McElwain. 2017 record, 3-4, fourth in the SEC East. And by the way, he took the Gators to an SEC East division title back in 2015 and 2016, respectively. But this year just did not pan out well for Florida. 111th in passing yards of the nation, 58th in rushing yards. So really not a great year. Of course, Florida had dealt with some off-the-field issues with some suspensions and some injuries, an offense that looked inept the entire season. And then, the defense playing well, and when the offense isn't carrying its weight, a lot of times that will go onto the head coach for not getting the offense ready to play while the defense is playing fantastic football. So that's the story with Jim McElwain. I'm going to get to the timeline in a matter of seconds. I just want to let everybody know that coming up later in the show, we will also be doing NFL Midseason Awards, so MVP, Rookie of the Year in defensive range, Rookie of the Year in the offensive range, and many others. So I'll give you guys those midseason awards as well as AFC team grades. I'll do the NFC on Wednesday, but the AFC is today, and then a final word later on the Houston Texans and the kneeling that went on yesterday night in that game before the Seattle Seahawks. So that's coming up all throughout the show here today. So a lot of analysis coming at you. And, of course, you can get the podcast version of the Cam Rogers Show for iTunes. Just search The Cam Rogers Show. You'll see a stupid picture of me pointing at you, and pretty much any picture of me is stupid. But with that, let's get back to the developing story with Jim McElwain. So this timeline is pretty surreal here. So we're going to start on October 7th. So entering this day, McElwain's record as a Florida head coach in total was 22-9, with, of course, 2 SEC East titles. The Gators are 3-1 after a loss to Michigan in a canceled game. Then Florida loses to LSU 17-16 in a game where the defense played fantastically, but the offense looked hapless, pathetic. And Florida, up until that loss to LSU, was getting lucky in a lot of tight games. And you thought at some point that McElwain and the Florida Gators were going to lose some of these tight games on the other side too. So, you had these games where Florida squeaked past Tennessee on a Hail Mary, and then you remember that game against UK, University of Kentucky, where they left two receivers wide open inexplicably. I had no idea what happened in that game. I'm sure you remember seeing those highlights. So Florida getting lucky in those two games. But in this loss to LSU, their kicker missed an extra point, and the final score was 17-16. So that was point number one for McElwain. So I guess that could be demerit number one. October 14th, Florida loses to Texas A&M, a team that just got blown out by Mississippi State. Final score of 19-17. And that was the game when Florida wore those gross swamp uniforms or whatever. So just to make matters worse, they lost the game by 2 points. And another game where Florida's defense played great, but a late score by the Aggies in the red zone pretty much capped it off for Texas A&M, and Florida went on losing that game. So that was October 14th. So where are we at now? We're at 3-3. October 23rd, a really bizarre situation with Jim McElwain and what he said in a press conference. By the way, not even prompted when this happened. So I'm sure you all know it. Starts the week off, October 23rd, by saying his team received death threats and implied that his family receives death threats as well. And at face value, you look at it and you say, well, okay, I guess I can kind of understand that. A lot of passionate fans in the SEC, especially in Florida and Alabama, etc., Georgia too. So, hey, maybe because you're underperforming, you're going to get some death threats and calls, what have you. Okay, fine. That's understandable. Let's address this. But the follow-up statement by the university was especially odd. So here it is. I'll read it for you. The University Athletic Association takes the safety of our student athletes, coaches, staff, and families very seriously. This is the weird part. Here it is. Our administration met with Coach McElwain this afternoon, and he offered no additional details on the matter. So essentially, Jim McElwain went in front of the media and said, I'm receiving death threats, my family's receiving death threats, my players are being threatened, and goes to the university, or the university goes to him, however you want to say it, and he doesn't reveal anything else other than that. So either Jim McElwain is really confidential and lives a secret life and doesn't like to reveal this information to the university, which doesn't make much sense because he just went in front of the media and did it, or two, McElwain's just lying. It's one of the two, and I'm leaning towards McElwain lying. Why would you not talk about this situation with the Florida University or University of Florida and the officials there? It just doesn't make much sense. And so hours before Florida set to kick off against Georgia on last Saturday, it was reported that the school and McElwain's agent were getting together to negotiate McElwain's $12.9 million buyout. There's that tweet at the top. Agent Jimmy Sexton and UF have been trying to work out Coach Mac's buyout, but are miles apart, still working hard on it. And a lot of people kind of scoffed at this tweet. This was at 9 a.m. that Saturday before the Georgia game, and people were like, oh, what does that mean? What source? Anonymous sources. You always have to take that with a grain of salt with anonymous sources. And it looks like there was a lot of truth to that tweet because Brett McMurphy, of course, coming later on Sunday evening saying all of a sudden Jim McElwain and Florida are now negotiating some sort of buyout, reduction, if you will. And it looks like they have agreed to something in principle. So that was the big bombshell report Saturday morning by Darren. And then you have Florida absolutely getting crushed by Georgia. Didn't even play well at all. It was just an embarrassment at the Swamp. And then McElwain going in front of the media again, asked, will he be surprised if he gets fired? He says, nothing surprises me. So this was that escalated quickly kind of situation, where we're looking at a timeline that started October 7th all the way up until now, where things just rapidly ratcheted up. And I think it calls for a that meme where you have Will Ferrell like reclining, and he's like, well, that escalated quickly. I think that was from the Anchorman movie. That's what it calls for right now. I mean, honestly, that's where we are at with the Jim McElwain timeline and how all that transpired. So it's not completely over yet because nothing has been signed. That's why this story is still developing. Like I said, McElwain and Florida have agreed to some sort of reduction in principal, but nothing has been pen hasn't been put to paper yet, if you will. So that's the situation there with McElwain and Florida. So with that, we have to look at some replacements here, folks. And this is always a fun little experiment, looking at potential replacements for McElwain at the University of Florida. University of Florida, obviously a highly coveted university. This is the SEC. This is the king of college football. And despite being in the SEC East, still, there is high acclamations to this position here that McElwain had, and that is now vacant, although we do have an interim coach and what have you. But with that, there is a slew of people who I think we can kind of look at here as potential suitors. But before I get there, I want to wrap up McElwain with this. So Florida was pursuing the situation with McElwain to hopefully not really buy out him at all, right? And not pay anything because they wanted just cause to fire him for perhaps lying about the death threats that were aimed at him, his family, and the players. And you know what's interesting? One of the potential replacements for McElwain, Mississippi State's head coach Dan Mullen, is represented by Jimmy Sexton, the same agent for Jim McElwain. So you have to wonder, is Sexton going to fight this to the bitter end with McElwain to try to get McElwain as much money as possible? Or is it one of those awkward situations where he's like, look, Jim, you're not going to get much money out of this. I'll do what I can, but I also have to look out for my other clients, a.k.a. Mullen. So I do not envy Sexton right now in terms of going through this whole situation. But like I said, University of Florida really looked into perhaps not paying McElwain at all with what transpired in those death threats. So we want you commenting, by the way. We had a reaction poll or our weigh-in earlier. We want you throwing in your thoughts about this head coach situation. Who should be replacing Jim McElwain? And perhaps who is next to get fired across college football? Butch Jones, another loss for him in Tennessee. Is it all over for him? Perhaps we'll be breaking some news today about Butch Jones leaving the University of Tennessee. So throw in those comments. We'll show them up throughout the broadcast here. Let's get into these potential replacements for head coach Jim McElwain. And we have Bob Stoops to kick it off with number 5. And I'll get to Stoops in a matter of seconds here. One final point that I want to wrap up on McElwain. Florida Athletic Director Scott Strickland said this, quote, "This was about more than just wins and losses. And I'll leave it at that." Wow. Oh, my God. Jim, buddy, do you need some ice for that burn? I mean, that is some pretty crazy stuff right there by Strickland. And I can't imagine McElwain really wants to deal with this situation any further. So, Bob Stoops, he's there at number 5 to perhaps replace McElwain. He's a retired Oklahoma head coach, storied career, but really, he's a young guy. He's in his 50s. Look, Nick Saban's still getting it done at 65. So, yes, he is retired, had a great run with Oklahoma, 190 wins to only 48 losses, was the defensive coordinator for UF back in the 1990s. The only problem is, when these guys go retired, it's kind of hard to really pry them out of it. And Bob Stoops actually said back in October, early October, that he's retired for good, and that if he had any prospects of returning to a head coaching position, he would have said so in his retirement speech, if you will, in his press conference where he said that he's done for good. He probably would have said something more along the lines of, I'm taking a break for a year and a half, and I'll be back ready to go later. But I'm not buying into that, and folks, you shouldn't buy into that either. Everybody has a price. Everybody does. If you throw a blank check in front of somebody, who knows what can happen? So Bob Stoops, we throw him in there at number 5. I think it's the least likely. Actually, I'll say the second least likely. Somebody else in this list is a little less likelier, but I put him up there because he's a big name. But Bob Stoops there at number 5. would be an interesting play if Florida went out and got this guy. Obviously, a big-time name. It fits that big-time school kind of mentality there with the University of Florida. So, Stoops at number 5. Let's get to number 4 here to perhaps replace Jim McElwain. Matt Campbell, Iowa State head coach, turned around a putrid 3-9 campaign for the Cyclones last year into what could be perhaps a top 15 team when the college football playoff rankings are revealed tomorrow night, 7 o'clock Eastern time here on Chat Sports. So Jim McElwain could be replaced by Matt Campbell. But by the way, it must be noted, Campbell, more of a Midwestern guy, doesn't know much about the SEC and the recruiting that goes on down there. But I really like Campbell, and I think he has a fantastic leadership to him. And it really showed something to me when he did that locker room speech after that victory over TCU. Honestly, I wanted to run through a wall when I saw the guy speak. And really, I think that is something that Florida needs right now. Some kind of unifier who can really bring these players together. Because like I said at the beginning of the show, there were some suspensions going on with players and, there were some off-the-field issues, so clearly a problem. Matt Campbell can mesh that together. He's a young guy. He's a fiery guy. I guess that can kind of be a deterrent in a way. Maybe he's not ready for the bright lights of Florida and the SEC yet. But heck, the way in which Iowa State is playing football right now, I say you give Matt Campbell a chance. As I see some comments flowing in, a little Dan Mullen action. Charlie Strong, heck, why not? But there's Matt Campbell there at number 4. Keep those comments flowing in, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be showing them. Let's get to number 3 here. Mike Norvell, this is an interesting one. So Memphis is playing fantastic football this year, leading the Tigers to a 7-1 record. Riley Ferguson, the quarterback there, playing exceptional football. And this is a high-powered offense that perhaps Florida would enjoy having. Actually, I think they would enjoy having because Florida's offense is not very good right now. But there's the youth thing again. So Mike, he's age 36, again, could be a deterrent for Florida, for the boosters, and, certainly could be a factor, but maybe that is a direction that Florida should go right now. Maybe they should go with someone who is young, who is fiery, who can bring a new energy into the swamp, a new energy into Gainesville, Florida. Because Jim McElwain clearly did not bring that energy, and he's one of the older coaches. Not the oldest, not old grizzled veteran, if you will, but he's up there. Norvell and Campbell, these guys bring an interesting energy that I think could change things in the SEC. Again, small-ish school in the FBS with Memphis, but still something to monitor. And Norvell, of course, was an offensive coordinator back in the day for University of Florida. So, hey, why not? Give it a chance. So there's number 3 there, Mike Norvell. Chip Kelly comes in at number 2. Former Oregon head coach, and he is going to be a tough one here because I think that, look, he's an analyst for ESPN. I think he's enjoying his job. A lot of times when people go into broadcasting, it's tough to pry them out. So it's not a Bob Stoops situation where Stoops is just enjoying retirement, and it's very possible he may just have that itch where he's a little bored, he may want to go back to coaching. Chip Kelly's busy. He's an analyst for ESPN for college football. So that's something to keep in mind. So I think it's kind of a long shot, but I wanted to put him up towards the top because of his big name. And look, the resume speaks for itself. 46-7 with Oregon, including 3 Pac-12 titles. It's going to take some temptation to get him in here, though. Get him in over into Gainesville because I assume he's enjoying his job. If he wasn't, I'm sure he would walk away. And so what more beautiful can it get than getting paid to talk about the sport you love? And I think that's what Chip Kelly's doing. Heck, that's what Tony Romo's doing. That's why people can't get him out of retirement. So Chip Kelly there at number 2. We're going to throw in some comments here. Keep them flowing, ladies and gentlemen. Before we get to number 1 in our list, Jimmy throwing up Les Miles. Hey, there's plenty of green grass to eat in Gainesville, Jimmy. Les Miles, hey, it makes sense to me. Why not? Bring him down. Maybe a little interview action. I haven't seen him in many lists, though. That's a very interesting point. Don Brown, another potential name that we could bring in here. for Gainesville and the University of Florida. I think they're going to open up all possible options. As Jimmy again comments with John Gruden. John Gruden, I don't know about that one. I mean, he's enjoying life on ESPN. If anything, I think he might go to an NFL position, but we shall see. Ron throwing in Scott Frost. Ron, great throw in there. That's a good name. UCF having a fantastic season, and UCF not too far from Gainesville, Florida. Scott Frost kind of taking that next step into the SEC. Makes a lot of sense, and he was actually towards the end of my list. Casey throwing in Dan Mullen. You know, Casey, I love transitions here on the Cam Rogers Show. So with that, let's bring in number one, the potential replacement for Jim McElwain. Casey, thank you very much for being a part of the show. Dan Mullen, Mississippi State head coach, former Florida offensive coordinator. Look, he helped develop Dak Prescott, SEC Coach of the Year in 2014, fresh off a shellacking of Texas A&M. Mississippi State has actually had a pretty good year. They were ranked and they were unranked at one point, and we'll see what the college football playoff rankings project here and reveal tomorrow night, 7 o'clock Eastern time on Chat Sports. But hey, I mean, Dan Mullen, he knows, obviously, the SEC. He knows the bright lights. He knows these big names, these big-time teams out there. So he probably has a leg up on the likes of Frost, on the likes of Campbell, and Norvell, if you will. These are kind of smaller FBS schools that don't have the pedigree that perhaps Mississippi State would. So Dan Mullen is number one on our list, ladies and gentlemen, to perhaps replace Jim McElwain. Terry chiming in. We want Saban. Terry, Saban's coaching Alabama, and Alabama's undefeated right now on the consensus number one team in college football. I don't think he's going to leave that position. But hey, you know what? We appreciate that comment because we love the hot takes here on the Cam Rogers Show. Steve chiming in with Tebow, freshly into the Florida Hall of Fame. Why not? Look, Tim Tebow can clearly do anything. He's a broadcaster. He plays baseball. He was a football player, won a playoff game for the Denver Broncos. Why the heck not, Steve? Why not? Terry also throwing in Spurrier. Hey, turn back the clock a little bit with the University of Florida. Go out and get Spurrier. What about the old ball coach? Not sure what that one means, Anthony. You're going to have to give me more details on that one. Abdel says, let's hire Mike Tomlin. Well, I guess you guys really have some confidence in being able to pry out some of these coaches who are in good situations right now. Terry with Saban, Abdel with Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh. Hey, I mean, if you guys go ahead and try to give them a call, give it a shot. We'll see what happens. Zachary, Charlie Strong. This is a good one. I like this one. I saw this comment here a couple of times. Certainly a possibility. He's obviously a big name, somebody that could come into Florida and really run a no-nonsense type of approach. I like him a lot. Lane Kiffin, Bryant says, you know, he just went to Florida Atlantic, but he's not too far away, Bryant, so I like where you're headed with that one. Lane Kiffin, you know, it's interesting. I wonder how long he's going to stay out there with the Florida Atlantic. Is he just kind of waiting out to kind of make that next step into, you know, in a head coaching position for a big-time college football school? Could be University of Florida. Lane Kiffin there. Thanks for the comment, Bryant, as we welcome you here. It's Cam Rogers live on the Cam Rogers Show talking about the developing story with Jim McElwain. So here's the latest. They have agreed, Florida and McElwain, to a buyout reduction in principle. That was reported last night by Brett McMurphy, and it seems as though perhaps they'll put pen to paper today, and this saga will be over. So Jim McElwain fired. Well, the spin zone phrasing is mutually parted ways, but he was fired from the Florida head coaching position, and it just was not a good year for him. So with that, Jim McElwain getting sent on his merry way. Florida, the head coaching search is on. So it's Stoops, Campbell, Norvell, Kelly, Mullen, all on my list to perhaps replace McElwain there at the University of Florida. There's one last recap for you all, ladies and gentlemen. Any Florida fans watching this show right now, throw in those comments. I want to know, do you want Mullen, Norvell, Kelly, Campbell, Stoops, any of those guys? Or do you lean more to the Kiffins, to the brand names like Saban? I mean, hey, I respect the tenacity there, ladies and gentlemen, trying to go out and get a big name like Saban, who is comfortably coaching for the University of Alabama. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be tracking this story throughout the day here on Chat Sports, but that's the latest with McElwain and the University of Florida. We're going to transition now into the NFL. Week 8 just wrapped up. We do have one more game tonight between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Denver Broncos, but I am revealing my midseason awards. And they're midseason awards, and also I am projecting ahead of time who is going to win these awards at the end of the year. So we're going to go through MVP, Defensive Rookie of the Year, Comeback Player of the Year, etc. All of the awards we see at the end of every NFL season. We're going to start on the top with the number one award that you can possibly win, the MVP, Most Valuable Player, Mr. Thomas Brady, quarterback for the New England Patriots. Number one in our MVP power rankings a week ago. Absolutely getting it done for the Patriots. Another solid performance by him against the Los Angeles Chargers yesterday. Those are the stats. Nice completion percentage, 16 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions, and of course he's a 2-time MVP winner in his own right. And I think the most impressive thing with Tom Brady this year, he's dealt with a pretty bad defense and some injuries to wide receivers, and also Gronkowski at one point this year. So Amendola has been dinged up. Of course, he lost Julian Edelman for the entire season. Offensive line has been good, but not elite. Running backs are good, but not elite. And Tom Brady, a lot of times, has been winning games on his own. So for him to not be the front runner here for the MVP race would be kind of crazy. So I have him as my projected MVP winner. Also, some other names that could be in there. Maybe a Carson Wentz, etc. We have honorable mentions that we will show you throughout these awards here, so I'm not going to leave out any of some potential suitors. We'll get to that graphic after I wrap up all of the full screen player cards, if you will, for all these awards. So we'll get to the honorable mentions later, but Tom Brady, quarterback for the Patriots, consensus pick in my eyes. I just think that he is far and away better than Carson Wentz right now. I shouldn't say far away, but he's certainly better than Carson Wentz right now because I think Carson Wentz at least has a better situation around him. He has a better offensive line. Seems like his running backs are getting it done as well. That defense is helping him out a lot, especially that front seven with Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox, etc. And for Tom Brady and that defense, look, the defense losing Dante Hightower is clearly going to mean that Tom Brady is going to have to fire on all cylinders the rest of the year if the Patriots want to get that number one seed in the AFC. And I think when Brady plays the likes of the Steelers, they're going to be giving up some pretty good yards in the process with Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown and that cast of characters there in Pittsburgh. So Tom Brady, as we stand right now, my pick to win the MVP in the NFL. Having a great year so far. We'll see if he can continue that. Let's get to the Offensive Player of the Year. That award goes to a name I just mentioned, Antonio Brown, wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. 2017 stats are fantastic. The touchdowns are kind of low, but that doesn't really concern me as much. Touchdowns can kind of be fluky at times. Think about it. When Pittsburgh's in the red zone, who are they going to double cover and bracket all the time? It's going to be Antonio Brown. Because the Steelers don't have this premier red zone tight end right now. Vance McDonald, you kidding me? And it's not like Martavis Bryant is a red zone threat. So they're going to clamp down on Antonio Brown as much as possible. So he's not going to get a lot of red zone touchdowns this year. But really, he is absolutely getting it done. Pro Football Focus, I think, is a beautiful tool to kind of look at the individual performances for players in the NFL. Antonio Brown, he is the only elite wide receiver in the NFL right now, according to Pro Football Focus. A fantastic grade of 93.4. And by the way, having a great year despite Ben Roethlisberger, let's face it, on the decline, not playing well this season. And Antonio Brown, he had a fantastic catch last night, actually, against the Detroit Lions, where there was a situation where Ben Roethlisberger was scrambling, doing Ben Roethlisberger-type things, and throws the football downfield. And if you look at one of the camera angles that NBC had, it did not look like Antonio Brown was open down the field. In fact, it looked like he was double covered. But you know what? Ben Roethlisberger trusted Antonio Brown. He threw the football down the field. He said to Antonio Brown, telepathically, of course, I know you can catch this football. I don't care if you're double covered right now. You know what happened? He came down with the football. That's what Antonio Brown does. When he is covered, he is open. He is always open. And so, a lot of times Ben Roethlisberger will be caught force-feeding the football to Antonio Brown, and that's kind of when interceptions happen. But in a way, you kind of can't blame the guy because of the way in which Antonio Brown can bring in a football. His catch radius is fantastic. Just a beautiful route runner, can fly, can do slants. He's an all-around, complete, elite wide receiver. That's why he is my pick to win the Offensive Player of the Year. We'll get to the honorable mentions later. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. This one, I got to give it up to the big guy. Calais Campbell, defensive end for the Jacksonville Jaguars. A disruptive 10 sacks this season, on pace for 20. And 20 tackles as well as 2 forced fumbles, a Pro Football Focus grade of 90.5, which is an elite grade in his own right. And really having a great year compared to last year. I mean, last year was a serviceable year for Campbell, but he's creating more turnovers than last year. 2 forced fumbles, all of 2016 for him. Already has 2 halfway through the 2017 campaign. Calais Campbell, of course, part of what is really an elite Jacksonville Jaguars defense with a premier cornerback tandem in A.J. Boye and Jalen Ramsey, and a front seven, obviously, with Talvin Smith, who recently signed an extension, rightfully so, having a great year at the linebacker position. In comes Marcel Darius, by the way, from Buffalo via a trade. So Campbell has a great situation around him. And I think what the beautiful thing about the Jacksonville defense is this. The interior offensive line does a fantastic job at eating up blocks. And what I mean by that is they engage the centers and the guards, or the center and the guards on the offensive line. What does that mean? That means that linebackers like Talvin Smith, like Miles Jack, can run free and get free shots right at the opposing quarterbacks. It also means that Calais Campbell and defensive ends for Jacksonville have one-on-one matchups with tackles, left tackles and right tackles. And that's why Calais Campbell has so many sacks this year. Because you have to give it up. Again, it's a team effort. That's just the way it is with this Jacksonville defense. They're elite up and down, from defensive line to secondary. And that's how Calais Campbell makes his money, basically, how he gets those sacks, because the interior line engages in the interior of that offensive line, sucks up those blocks, creates one-on-one matchups on the outside with the right tackle and left tackle, and Calais Campbell's going to eat all day long when that happens. So really a great performance by him so far this season. We'll see if he can keep it going. Has some interesting honorable mentions behind him as well. Another Jacksonville Jaguar that I'll get to. Stay tuned for that. All right, let's talk about some rookies here, ladies and gentlemen. Offensive Rookie of the Year with perhaps still an opportunity to win MVP. An outside shot, Kareem Hunt, running back for the Kansas City Chiefs. Look at this. 5.8 yards per carry. Reminiscent of, shall we say, a Jamal Charles, a former Kansas City Chief. 717 yards on the year for Hunt. That's just rushing, by the way. 6 total touchdowns, a Pro Football Focus grade of 93.3, which is an elite grade, and he is number 1 among all running backs. And by the way, he was just a late third-round pick. Pretty good ROI, return on investment there for Kareem Hunt. So really a great year for him, and a great year overall for the Kansas City Chiefs offense. Travis Kelce has been great at the tight end position. Offensive line is managing the game nicely with that zone blocking scheme. Alex Smith, efficient as they come. No interceptions so far this year. And the Chiefs play great ball control offense. So Kareem Hunt there, on pace to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. By the way, as we go through all these awards here, I want you folks weighing in. Perhaps I'm missing some names. So yell at me in the comments section. We'll be showing them throughout the broadcast here on the Cam Rogers Show. But Kareem Hunt, your Offensive Rookie of the Year as we stand right now. Let's get into the Defensive Rookie of the Year. This guy is something else. And we are in an era of the NFL, ladies and gentlemen, where young cornerbacks are getting it done. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And why is that? Because we're in an era where passing yards are just blowing up box scores, and we need something to kind of dial that back. And we are thankful for the likes of Marshawn Lattimore and Jalen Ramsey and A.J. Boye, etc., to kind of create some good defensive plays and to kind of lower the stat line a little bit, create some more defensive battles out there in the NFL. Marshawn Lattimore, a rookie cornerback. 2 interceptions so far this year, had one yesterday. 22 tackles, 7 passes defensed. A Pro Football Focus grade of, get this, 94.1. That's number 1 among qualified cornerbacks in the NFL. That's beating out Aqib Talib. That's beating out Richard Sherman. Richard Sherman doesn't even have an elite grade according to Pro Football Focus right now. Beating out Chris Harris. All of these fantastic corners out there. Marshawn Lattimore, an 11th overall pick, clearly paying that investment for the New Orleans Saints. The Saints needed playmakers in the secondary, in the front seven, etc., pretty much top down. And they got that with Marshawn Lattimore in that back end. And it's showing with the way in which the Saints are playing defense so far this year. Of course, Cam Jordan, obviously a big part of that, and creating plays on that defensive line there. But Marshawn Lattimore has been a great addition to this secondary. And as a big boy football fan, if you will, I love grinded out defensive battles. Marshawn Lattimore has been a nice addition to the NFL, a nice addition to the New Orleans Saints, and is on pace to win Defensive Rookie of the Year. So great year so far by Lattimore. He's at that point, folks, where, if in fantasy football circles, if you are playing against him, if one of your wide receivers is going up against this guy, you're benching that wide receiver, unless it's like Antonio Brown and A.J. Green and maybe Julio Jones. That's how good Lattimore has been so far this year. All right, so he's my Defensive Rookie of the Year here at the midway point of the NFL. Let's move on to Comeback Player of the Year. This one was kind of tough because usually Comeback Player of the Year awards go to players who, suffered a really bad injury last year and then they came back, had a great season. I couldn't really find anyone that filled that narrative, but DeAndre Hopkins has had really a great season. And I think he really cemented that yesterday with what was, I believe, somewhere around a 70-plus yard catch for a touchdown against a Seattle Seahawks secondary that is obviously no slouch. This season, 45 receptions, 606 yards, 7 touchdowns. And the best part is he finally has adequate quarterback play. Goodbye, T.J. Yates. Goodbye, Brian Hoyer. Goodbye, Brock Osweiler. Hello, gritty gamer Deshaun Watson, meant for prime time. And it showed yesterday the way in which Deshaun Watson played football against that Seattle defense in Seattle. And DeAndre Hopkins is just such a raw talent, a physical talent, but he's a smart player as well. And I think that is starting to really shine this year because he has the better situation, heck, the best situation that he's ever had in Houston. He is, in my eyes, still an elite wide receiver. He really is. And I think that is going to only bolster his stock as we go forward across the NFL, across the season this year, because I think he's going to continue to rise in the ranks among the wide receivers and among the pundits, if you will, in the NFL. And again, playing for a quarterback in Brock Osweiler last year and still putting up okay numbers is actually very impressive in and of itself. But DeAndre Hopkins, really good so far this year. So there he is there as the Comeback Player of the Year. Finally, we have the Coach of the Year, Doug Peterson of the Philadelphia Eagles. Really has had a fantastic campaign there in the city of brotherly love. We can finally notch up that record to 7-1 after what was a dominant performance against the San Francisco 49ers. Carson Wentz playing fantastic football. Defense and that front seven, like I mentioned, with Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham, etc., elite players at this point in the interior. Getting it done, and by the way, that's creating opportunities for that secondary to make plays. This is not an elite secondary, guys. Mills, these aren't great corners. These are young guys, and the way in which Doug Peterson has been coaching this team, it's been really a pleasant surprise to see. And I'm hearing also that Philadelphia is going to be very active before the trade deadline tomorrow. And looks like the Eagles perhaps may be going out and trying to get a left tackle maybe to replace Jason Peters. That injury is really tough to see. Really the premier pass protector in the NFL outside of maybe Joe Thomas and Trent Williams. And they're actually all banged up right now. Peters, Thomas, done for the year. Trent Williams didn't play yesterday for Washington. So Philadelphia, going to be active in the deadline, but Doug Peterson has just done a fantastic job for these Eagles, and they're destined, honestly, guys, for a number 1 seed in the NFC right now. Can you believe that? Carson Wentz, obviously, a big part of it, and I think Doug Peterson is a big part of Carson Wentz's development in the NFL. Really a great year for the Eagles, and they're going to continue to play well. This is no fluke team, guys. I remember, we were saying earlier this year, or many people were saying that, maybe Philadelphia is going to drop off a little bit. That's what happened last year. Not this year. They're for real this year. They're getting it done. And they actually have some pretty good wide receivers, too, finally, which is different than previous years. That's kind of what held them back, right? When Matthews out there was your best wide receiver. Not the case this year. You got Alshon Jeffrey, Zach Ertz with a great resurgence there at the tight end position. And really a great season so far for the Philadelphia Eagles. Doug Peterson getting it done. He's your coach of the year at the midway point. Let's get to the honorable mentions now. Perhaps I will mention some names that were screaming in your head. The MVP honorable mentions: Alex Smith, Kareem Hunt, Carson Wentz. I talked about these 3 guys at some point here today. Alex Smith yet to throw an interception. Not having an Alex Smith-like game manager season has really ratcheted it up this year for his stat line and really for his performance on the field overall. Getting wins for the Kansas City Chiefs. Great year for Alex Smith, but also a great year for Kareem Hunt. These two have complemented each other in fantastic fashion. And the Kansas City Chiefs are going to continue to be a force in the AFC this year. And I'll get to my grade about them later. Finally, Carson Wentz, MVP, honorable mention number 3. Obviously, the development is beautiful for him, as well as Jared Goff, both coming out of the same draft class. So Carson Wentz there. HM for MVP. How about Offensive Player of the Year? You got Ezekiel Elliott, Le'Veon Bell, A.J. Green. Zeke Elliott, despite all of the off-the-field headlines with the suspension, non-suspension, suspension, non-suspension, still obviously a bell cow back. You know what? And I think the best part about him, he will lay his body on the line in pass protection. He picks up those blitzes. So he does it all. That's what you got to love out of a young running back in Ezekiel Elliott. So he's there as my Offensive Player of the Year in honorable mentions. Le'Veon Bell, need I say more, revolutionizing the running back position with the way in which he runs. Patient runner, very solid for the Pittsburgh Steelers. A big reason why the Steelers are playing well this year. A.J. Green, he just defies the impossible sometimes, playing against elite corners and still getting it done outside with Andy Dalton. And by the way, Andy Dalton playing behind a putrid offensive line. A.J. Green still getting his own this year. So really a great year for him so far. Defensive Player of the Year, honorable mentions: Jalen Ramsey, cornerback for the Jacksonville Jaguars, teammate of Calais Campbell, who is my pick to win Defensive Player of the Year. And Cam Jordan, mentioned him as well. Defensive end for the New Orleans Saints, obviously an elite player. He's an elite grade according to Pro Football Focus. And then Bobby Wagner, a really good linebacker for the Seattle Seahawks. Coach of the Year, honorable mentions: Mike Zimmer, Bill Belichick, Sean McDermott. I think Sean McDermott was really an interesting name. Look what Buffalo just did to Oakland yesterday, guys, in Orchard Park. Blew out the Oakland Raiders, a team we thought had Super Bowl aspirations. And the Buffalo Bills crushed them. So Sean McDermott doing a great job. Bill Belichick, I feel like it's just going to stay there for the end of time in the Coach of the Year conversation. It's just the way it is. Bill Belichick, obviously, one of the premier coaches in the National Football League. Mike Zimmer, I put him there because of the turnover at quarterback, going from Sam Bradford to Case Keenum to bringing Teddy Bridgewater off the PUP list to Bridgewater perhaps coming back in Week 10. And that defense is obviously fantastic with Anthony Barr, Linval Joseph, Harrison Smith, top down, an elite defense. And Case Keenum has actually showed some pretty good play this year. And I say that in a surprising tone because obviously we did not expect Case Keenum to be an adequate quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. Stephon Diggs having a great year. Adam Thielen does not get a lot of credit, but really a great wide receiver in his own right. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we're bringing you back on screen. It's Cam Rogers here on the Cam Rogers Show, going through the midseason awards. I just gave you some honorable mentions for some of those awards that I talked about. We have a few more for Offensive Rookie of the Year, Defensive Rookie of the Year, and Comeback Player of the Year. Before we get there, though, I want to remind you, you can download the podcast version of the Cam Rogers Show. Search me on iTunes, by, of course, searching The Cam Rogers Show. Subscribe, leave a review. It would mean a lot to me, and of course, keep the bosses happy here at Chat Sports. So many thanks to you for tuning into the program here. We have a developing story bar at the top there, talking about Jim McElwain as well. Talked about that at the top of the show. If you want more details about that, stick around for the end of the hour. We'll replay the show here on Facebook Live, as well as you can check it out on the podcast. All the details are there. But in sum, Jim McElwain and Florida have agreed to a deal in principle, a buyout reduction, if you will, and it seems as though they're going to put pen to paper at some point today to make this official. Okay, so let's get to the honorable mentions for Offensive Rookie of the Year, Defensive Rookie of the Year, and Comeback Player of the Year. Offensive Rookie of the Year, Leonard Fournette, playing behind what is just an average offensive line, and you have to assume this. Fournette is facing his fair share of 8-man boxes because Blake Bortles does not scare any opposing defense. So really, it's been an impressive year for Fournette. Deshaun Watson there as well. He only cemented my pick to put him in here for honorable mention after what was really a beautiful performance against the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, he went into Seattle as a rookie and put up 30-plus points. That's a great day for Deshaun Watson. Cooper Kupp there as well has had a great year in L.A. Defensive Rookie of the Year, Tre'Davious White for Buffalo has had a really good season at corner. Malik Hooker also has had a really good season at safety. So the secondary is in good hands for all the NFL in the years to come. Comeback Player of the Year, Todd Gurley is in the conversation. Zach Ertz just scored a touchdown yesterday. And Jimmy Smith having a shutdown corner type of season for the Baltimore Ravens. He's back to being what everybody thought he was going to be coming out of the draft there for Baltimore. Has had many injuries over the course of his career, but really a great season for Jimmy Smith. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you're watching the Cam Rogers Show here on Chat Sports Facebook Live. Like I said, we are at the midway point in the National Football League. It's time to get to some team grades. We're going to blow through them here. We're doing the AFC today. We'll do the NFC on Monday, or actually on Wednesday, excuse me. And if we have any layover from the AFC teams, maybe I'll mention them a little further on Wednesday. But let's get through the grades here. We'll start in the AFC North. The Cleveland Browns, you have failed the 2017 NFL test. You're 0-8. Your QB situation is pathetic. You have no semblance of a run game or passing attack. Your wide receiver core is brutal. Your head coach is in a position where he should probably be fired, although it looks like he's not going to be fired because the Browns came out and said that he won't be. But whatever the heck that means could just be, team speak, if you will. So the Browns, no surprise, they are my only failing team in the AFC right now. So there they are. Sorry, Brownie fans out there. Let's hope you can get a win this season. I'm not so sure you can. Baltimore Ravens, a C-plus grade. They're 4-4 on the year, and I gave them a plus because they have the most players on injured reserve this year, and yet they're still 500. I like the way in which they have beautiful playmakers on that defensive side with C.J. Mosley and Eric Weddle, who's a great captain in that secondary, and Brandon Williams, who eats up blocks on that offensive line and does a great job in run stuffing. We'll have to see how Joe Flacco does with his concussion protocol, but all things considered for the Baltimore Ravens, keeping those injuries in mind, a C-plus grade I think is warranted. The Cincinnati Bengals, they get a D from me. That offensive line is awful. It took them to the bitter end. It took them to a point where Carlos Dunlap had to somehow intercept a ball by Jacoby Brissett at the end of the game to win this matchup against the Colts. And the wide receivers outside of A.J. Green have been awful. LaFell, John Ross has been hurt. Of course, they lost Eifert for the year. Cincinnati Bengals, they did a really bad job drafting this year, not addressing that offensive line, and it's showing, so they get a D grade from me. Finally, here in the AFC North, the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm giving them an A-. 6-2 record this year. Great matchup last night against the Detroit Lions at Ford Field. Didn't look great doing it, but they did get the victory. The big reason why this team has 6 wins is Le'Veon Bell. I mean, he has been the rock for them. A true bell cow back there. And that defensive secondary with Artie Burns, etc., have had a really good season. We did not expect that. And that pass rush with Shazier and Hayward in that front, getting it done as well. So it's really a top-bottom type of defense like Minnesota Vikings or Jacksonville Jaguars. The only minus is because of Ben Roethlisberger. I'm not so sure what we're going to get out of him once the Pittsburgh Steelers start playing the New England Patriots and some of these elite teams in the NFL. So that's my only kind of concern with the Steelers, but they are where they are. Nice 6-2 record, A- from me. Let's get to the putrid AFC South, and this is just kind of a mosh pit. We'll start with the Colts. They get a D-. They're 2-6. Offensive line is pathetic outside of Anthony Costanzo, who's probably the only adequate offensive lineman there. And Vontae Davis, by the way, guys, there have been some trade rumors for him. He's been awful this year. He's got a Pro Football Focus grade of below 50. That's a poor grade, according to PFF. So the Colts, even their most premier big-name players, are not getting it done. Costanzo is graded in the 70s at left tackle, so not even great for him. So the Colts have just been a train wreck. Chuck Pagano could be on a major hot seat at this point. Could be getting news today of him getting fired. I mean, it really could come to that point with the Indianapolis Colts. Jacoby Brissett, he's had some nice flashes, but overall, not so good. All right, let's check out with the Tennessee Titans. We'll get to the Texans and Jags, too. They all have similar grades here. So the Titans have a B grade. 4-3 record this season. And I think it's especially impressive because they've been battling this Mariota injury adversity with the hamstring, and yet they're still playing good ball control, smash mouth football. And I think that's meant for January. It's meant for playoff football. So the Tennessee Titans there get a B for me. Let's move on here in the AFC South. A couple of other teams to get to. Talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars, a B+ grade. And they could be rising. 4-3 record, ferocious defense, an elite defense at that, and a great run game despite an average offensive line. Kitty got claws! These Jacksonville Jaguars have been fantastic this year. Finally, in the AFC South, the Houston Texans, they get a B from me. I could probably give them a B+, but that 3-4 record kind of says otherwise. So the defense has played well. They've faced their fair share of adversity, too, with the loss of J.J. Watt and Whitney Merciless. But Deshaun Watson, guys, is on a different level. He really is. And has played great at the quarterback position. And it showed again against Seattle, like I said. So the Houston Texans, I don't think they're going to go away in the AFC South race. There's still plenty of divisional matchups within that division to go. And I think the Houston Texans are built the best to actually beat the other teams within their division. Better than the Jacksonville Jaguars, better than the Tennessee Titans. So we'll see how the AFC South goes through here. So B grade for the Texans. Let's get to the AFC East, the Miami Dolphins. They are so lucky that I'm giving them a B- right now. All you Dolphins fans out there, thank your lucky stars. They should be getting like a C- at best because they are a fraud team. They're 4-3. They just got blown out by my Baltimore Ravens on Thursday Night Football. Offensive performances the last few weeks, heck, the entire season, hasn't been there. With Cutler under center, with Matt Moore under center, it does not matter. Jay Ajayi has been a major disappointment at running back, not breaking as many tackles as he did last year. Defensive front has actually been pretty good. That's the one nice spot. That's the one reason why they have 4 wins. But the secondary is not holding its end of the bargain. So Miami getting a B- from me. How about the New York Football Jets? You know what? I kind of want to give them a sentimental A+ because they're not like 0-8. 3-5 this year. They battled again yesterday against the Atlanta Falcons. This team is not going to be an easy out the entire season. Look, Josh McCown's a quality quarterback. Like an adequate quarterback, putting him in comparison to the entire league of quarterbacks and how putrid some of these players are. So Josh McCown playing nicely. Robbie Anderson coming into his own. That defense, it's solid top down. There's no real playmaker. They don't create a lot of turnovers, or they do create a lot of turnovers, but they don't really put them into points, I should say. But still, the New York Jets doing what they do at 3-5. They're not going to make any noise in the playoffs. But still, a nice little C- grade. You go, New York Jets. You go. Well done. How about the New England Patriots? My one team that gets an A grade. 6-2 this year. Tom Brady on an MVP track. And I think the defense has finally hit its stride, schematically speaking. And they're going to need scheme now more than ever because of that Dante Hightower injury. So, you remember them playing a couple of weeks ago against the Atlanta Falcons on Sunday Night Football with Hightower, of course, in there. And that defense shut out the Falcons and that high-powered offense. They did it again yesterday against the Los Angeles Chargers, and it was a gritty, tight performance, something that Tom Brady probably is happy to see because he doesn't have to throw the football 55 times, 60 times, whatever it may be. So the New England Patriots get an A in my book. Really great season for them. Buffalo Bills, how about Bills Mafia? A- grade, 5-2 record, first time since 2011 that has happened. A fantastic safety tandem with Micah Hyde and Poyer there. And they never turn the ball over. Ball control offense. Tyrod Taylor is doing exactly what he needs to do. LaShawn McCoy, shady if you will, has been a great running back this year. And even with the loss of Mike Gillislee, clearly McCoy has not lost a step here. So for the Buffalo Bills this year to play fantastic football with what was, a lot of bad headlines going into this season. Remember when so much turnover with this team and trading away players and cutting players, etc.? People are like, what the heck are the Bills doing? Sean McDermott, you look like a genius now. So the Buffalo Bills get an A- grade from me. Wrapping up the AFC here, let's get to the AFC West. The Los Angeles Chargers, a C+. 3-5. They have a great pass rush and Joey Bosa and Ingram there. And a great corner tandem, kind of like the Bills have a great safety tandem. They have Casey Hayward and Trevor Williams, really solid performers in the back end. And Phillip Rivers, he doesn't have a great offensive line. I'm not a big fan of the scheme for the Chargers. I think they need to do more play action. I think they need to run the football more in a general sense, in a more traditional sense. But still, Melvin Ingram, dealing with turf toe, had a big play yesterday for the Chargers. And so for the Los Angeles Chargers to have a nice record of 3-5, all things considered, right? We got to talk about things in perspective to their projections going into this year. I'm going to give them a C+. And I think maybe they can contend going into this year. In fact, I projected that they'd only lose one more game the rest of the season and actually make the playoffs. We'll see if that happens. Here's a team that has been a big-time disappointment. The Oakland Raiders get a D+ from me. And so the Chargers get a C+. They're 3-5. Oakland Raiders get a D+. They're 3-5. You may be wondering why. Well, it's all about expectations. The Oakland Raiders are supposed to be a Super Bowl team, guys. And the NFL's most expensive offensive line with Hudson and Penn, etc., assembly there at right guard, not playing up to snuff, not pass protecting effectively for Derek Carr. Derek Carr has been very inconsistent this year. Will it have to do with that back? We shall see. Raiders, big disappointment, D+ for me. Finally, or actually we have a couple more. Denver Broncos, they get a C-. They play tonight. They have a 3-3 record, a fraud team. They can run the football, but they don't do it enough. Doesn't make any sense to me. I think I should go do the offensive coordinating duties for the Denver Broncos right now. And the wide receivers have underperformed, relatively speaking. So Denver, C- for me. Finally, there actually was another team that got an A. Kansas City Chiefs, 5-2 record. Again, they play tonight. Efficient offense with, like I mentioned, no interceptions this year, and Tyreek Hill and Kareem Hunt providing that big play potential that I like to see in the NFL. Alex Smith, he continues to get it done, and the Kansas City Chiefs and the New England Patriots could be on a crash course for an AFC championship game unless the Pittsburgh Steelers have something to say about it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Cam Rogers Show here on Chat Sports Facebook Live. No time to get into my final word. It was about the Houston Texans and their kneeling, but I want you commenting on that. Throw it into the box. I'll address them in post-production, and we'll get to that later. But again, you can get to the podcast version of the Cam Rogers Show, searching The Cam Rogers Show on iTunes. I will see you Wednesday morning. Until then, see ya.